All right, we're ready to go on. Welcome to the second of these research Tapases sponsored by the Lorna College of Medicine. Thank you for Charlie Irvin, or to Charlie Irvin for organizing these, and for Aaron for making sure that we have a room and some snacks. Remember, the objective of these is to spend 20 minutes on me going over some information, and the information I'm going to go over today is on NIH Biosketches. And it's being recorded, so you have to be careful about how you ask your questions. All right, so as I was preparing for this lecture, I thought about the best-selling autobiographies currently on Amazon. And we might be familiar with these. We've heard a lot about What Happened by Hillary Rodham Clinton, and the rest of these I've really paid no attention to. This is, I guess, the Bush daughters and a couple of others. So autobiographies, not the best sellers on Amazon, but these are the best of those. So why does someone write an autobiography?
They think they have an interesting story.
Correct. And you're so good. Okay, think like a scientist. Remember, think negative. Why else do you write an autobiography? To get money. I heard it. Adam, thank you. And that's why we write autobiographies. In this case, is to get money. And who's the audience of these autobiographies? Average people? John Q. Public? Jane Q. Public? Right. Who's the audience for your autobiography? And I'll give you a hint. It's three people. Three people. Reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and reviewer 3. You're writing this document that, if you haven't done it before, is going to take you some time, basically for 3 people. And I'll say 4/5 of it is never going to be looked at. Okay? I've reviewed, and I know the reality of reviewers. So what's in your autobiography, and why do you write it? It's a way to present yourself to the world, right? You think you know who you are. You may give an impression to others around you of who you are. But until people read a document like this, they won't be able to tell you who you are. And ultimately, it doesn't matter who you think you are. It's how those people, it's who those people think you are. I remember reading a grant review I got back once, and they said, Matt Pointer does this. I said, I don't do that. But apparently they had gotten that impression. While actions speak louder than words, right? It's really what we do every day that we think is important. These words still have meaning, and it's what goes into this document that's going to be the impression that you leave with those 3 reviewers. So after our session 3 weeks ago, right, you all have a CV. Yes, a curriculum vitae. I have one. It's 47 pages long. No one's going to read that. No one. So we need something that is a little more concise. You have all your publications on PubMed, right? I can look you up. Well, that might be the case, but a reviewer isn't supposed to go to web pages to access information. There are some exceptions to that. And there's this concept of author name ambiguity. Now, who is public-JQ? I can tell you when you look up Pointer-M, you get 108 publications. And 7 of those are really interesting, but I had absolutely nothing to do with them. Although if you looked at the timing and you looked at the topics, it seems very reasonable that I could have, except for the one on tooth decay. So reviewers need a concise and a functional bibliographical document to evaluate a bunch of things. These include the applicant's training record, their employment, their areas of expertise, in other words, the impact of their work, and their funding record. Ultimately, this is the information you're trying to convey through your autobiography. And your autobiography is called a biosketch. That's the nomenclature that the National Institutes of Health uses. There are other biosketches that other funding agencies use, but their format will not be the same. So what I'm focusing on today is where we get most of our money, those of us in the College of Medicine, and that's through the NIH. So let's look about what the NIH says about biosketches. Now, you might have heard that there's a new biosketch format. Now, it's not really new because it was first announced in December of 2014. And this is a notice that came out from the Office of the Director, and it goes into effect in 2015, and it was the 32nd one of those. All right, so that's what those numbers and letters mean. This is the title, New Biographical Sketch Format Required for NIH and AHRQ grant applications submitted after May 25th, 2015. So we've been doing a new biosketch format for about 2.5 years. And those of you who don't have old ones, it doesn't really matter. But the new one really is an improvement, but it's a lot more work. You can maybe go to this link if Aaron ends up posting it to take a look at what this notice said. And what it did say is that the new Biosketch is limited to 5 pages. I believe it used to be 4, so it actually increased in length. And the old Biosketch used to have a bunch of papers, and it had your funding. That was about it. The new Biosketch describes up to 5 of the researchers' most significant contributions to science, along with a historical background that forms a framework for that work. It can outline the central findings of the prior work and the influence of those findings that they've had on field. And if you're involved in team science, it can say what your role is going to be either in the previous team science or in the new team science. So if you're a bioinformatician and you've contributed to hundreds and hundreds of papers and it's not really clear what you did, you'll want to say that here. You know, your expertise may be evident, but it might not be. So you're going to want to use this as an opportunity to explain who you are and what you do. And what's nice about these most significant contributions is that you get to cite 4 papers or products, research products, right? As a director of CMB, I'm always told that isn't the requirement that you have 2 papers before you leave? Well, yes, that's kind of our currency as papers, but honestly, dissertations can have other metrics by which they're evaluated. So you can have patents, data research materials, databases, educational aids or curricula, instruments or equipments, models, protocols, software, netware, a whole bunch of different things that are of your original thinking, with your hands in your head, but they don't have to be papers. It's best if you have papers, I can tell you as a reviewer. And what's really nice too is that now there's a link to the full list of the researchers' published works. This is the information on a website that reviewers can access if they so choose. So there's 2 formats for the NIH Biosketch, and I can see we've got people that would use both in this room. The instructions and forms are going to be at this link, and the biographical sketch for key personnel, that's generally the more senior people. Once you've maybe completed a postdoc, you could be considered to be key personnel. And those for fellowship applications are a little bit different. But we're going to actually go over both because I knew there'd be both types of people in the audience. So how is a NIH Biosketch formatted? And I'm going to go over each of these sections, so they're a little bit sparse here. We first have a header. We then have a personal statement with 4 relevant citations, and we'll go over how this differs from section C. So A is a personal statement. B are your prior positions, current positions, and any honors. C are your contributions to science. And D is your research support or scholastic performance, and perhaps both, depending on what position you're at. So let's take a look at the header. Just like in kindergarten or preschool, the first thing you put on the paper is your name. All right, so that's first. The second is your ERA Commons username. Now, how many of you in this room have one, an ERA Commons username? So you're either on training grants or you are grant applicant yourself. At some point, Graham, that's when you first needed one, right? Was when you got assigned to the training grant. So at some point, this will become necessary for you to get a common user's name. And ERA Commons is the way with which those of us who use NIH for funding interact with it electronically. You'll need your position title. You'll need your past education and training. And you're going to begin with your baccalaureate degree or other professional education you may have had. Include your postdoc, your residency, clinical fellowship training, each listed separately. And for each of these entries, you want to provide where, you want to provide what degree, you want to provide when, and what it was in. You can get creative here too, by the way. So you then need a personal statement. You need to describe why you are the best person in the world to do what you're saying you want to do. And what you're saying you want to do is going to differ depending on each different grant application that you submit. You're going to want to, after this personal statement, cite up to 4 publications or research projects that highlight your experience and qualifications. Again, those are going to differ depending on the grant application. And we'll go into that a little bit. I'll use an example of mine and we can see how this might get catered to different audiences. Yes, yep. This could be important for some, and I've seen this in applications I reviewed. If there are factors that affected your past productivity, You decided that you were going to do some sort of sabbatical for a number of years. You were going to take a break from research. You had family care responsibilities, you know, a parent or children or relatives. If you yourself were ill or disabled, you had to go away from military service. You can put that in here. And I've seen just about each of these. Indicate whether you published or created research products under a different name. So if you changed your last name for some reason or your first name. You can mention specific contributions to science that aren't included in the section C, but don't be redundant. You can't use figures, tables, or graphics, so it's not like some conference abstracts that you might put out. And if you're looking for a dissertation research award, you should also include a description of your career goals, career trajectory, interest in specific areas of research that are designated in that funding opportunity announcement. So, positions and honors is B. Yes.
What's the current thing whether or not that should help or hurt your choices? And there, is it likely to get positive?
I think you have, it's like a coin flip, an equal chance. You know, why couldn't the person deal with whatever adversity was set before them? Or, you know, this is a very legitimate reason, and I've seen both argued in front of study section. Productivity is always a metric by which people are evaluated, and if there's you know, if there's a gap and it's obvious, and you have what you feel is a legitimate reason to explain it, I would include it instead of letting it be ambiguous. So your positions and honors, chronological order of the positions that you've held, concluding with your current position. Achievements or honors, in particular, students, postdocs, and junior faculty should include any scholarships like training grants, traineeships, fellowships, development awards that you might have received. Clinicians need information on their licensures, board certifications. So that's pretty straightforward. And contributions to science. This is where you're going to spend a lot of time. You want to think about your 5 most significant contributions to science if you're a new or established investigator. You need to have a description of each that's no longer than about a half of a page, including the 4 citations. Graduate students, postdocs, you don't have to have 5. You don't have to make things up. They recommend including 2 or 3 so that you have something. And if you just have one, you just have one. Let's be honest. You know, people are going to look at that depending on the type of application that you're submitting and the amount of time that you've been in the field. So again, kind of like the personal statement, for each contribution, indicate the historical background that frames the scientific problem, the central findings, and the influence or the impact of those findings, and tell what you did in that work. You can describe these 4, you can have these 4 publications or research materials, research products might be included. And then a web link to your published work. It has to be a .gov suffix, so don't use Google Scholar for this. Otherwise, reviewers aren't expected to be able to access it. It's not a requirement to have this, but I've never seen an application without it. You can include mention of things that are under development, such as manuscripts that are in preparation, but you can't cite them in these 4 publications because obviously they aren't yet published. Yes? I'm not familiar with that name. Is that a .gov? Looks like Gary might know something about it. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that's actually the 4th bullet point down needs to be revised. So you are now actually allowed to cite things that are NIH made that rule change 6 months ago or so. And it means that if you posted a preprint, you can include it as evidence of contribution or deficiency.
So that wasn't the answer to that question, though.
That was kind of my question. But can you include something that is published on bioarchives, like one of the publications, as evidence of the publication? Because it's a fully prepared manuscript.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to be careful with different funders. They might not all, but NIH allows, which is very important.
So your research support and scholastic performance. So list anything that you've completed or have ongoing from the last 3 years. You're not supposed to include your effort on it or the amount of money. The objective of having the research support is to highlight your accomplishments and those of your colleagues as scientists. Now, a lot of us in the room won't have any research support. So we have scholastic performance we can use instead. So this is where it differs between the pre-doc, postdoc, trainee type application and those for the more established types of investigators. So you want to put undergraduate institution, graduate, professional courses, grades. Explain if you have an unusual grading system other than 0 to 100, 4-point scale, A through F, anything like that, that might be unusual. And if you can indicate the levels required for a passing grade. So the established, early stage, and new investigators terms that the NIH uses will generally only include the research support. If you're doing a career development type of an award, you might complete the research support. But for a lot of the people in the room, the research support section is not necessary. Instead, you're going to use the scholastic performance section. So for dissertation grants or for postdocs. So what does this all look like? And I use an example that I prepared pretty recently. First thing to look at is this is a form page that the NIH mandates. And since I put this together a couple weeks ago, there's actually a newer one that goes through 2020. So these are still approved through October of 18, but there's actually a new one already. It differs very, very subtly, but this is one of the things that someone could maybe ding you on if they so chose. So this is the header section. Here's my name, my user comment, my position title, and my training history. Now, my degree was in experimental pathology. It doesn't mean a lot to anyone. It doesn't reflect the immune part that I did. So this is where I, could be creative. It's the field of study. It's not the degree conferred. Okay. So then I have a personal statement. So I have a statement that says what I do in my laboratory, what techniques I used, and then this is for a T32 application we're putting in. And so I wanted to highlight here that since we're going in as a multiple PI, that I've actually been a PI in training for the last section of this, and that I've trained a bunch of students in my laboratory, that I'm head of the CMB program, things like that. So people can read that and say, okay, this guy can probably work with people to help train. And then, so what papers should I cite along with this that go along with what I've done? So I've chosen to go by what I've done recently under a single topic. And recently we've been doing a lot of things with obese asthma. So these are all recent papers that have to do with obese asthma. So section B then, the positions and honors. After I completed my postdoc, I became an assistant professor, and then what I've done since, the honors that I've had. I think people like to see if you've done any reviewing for government agencies. So those are the study sections on which I've served. Yep. Yeah, I think at that point, this more reflects past accolades rather than the 3 years for me. So I think if it's within the 3 years, you have to put it into the funding. If it is beyond that point, say you had a pre-doctoral one and you're now more than that out, you want to put it into the honors. So then contributions to science, and I start with what I did as a grad student, steroid hormone regulation of age-associated immune dysregulation, and then what I started doing as a postdoc, airway epithelial NF-kappa B and allergic asthma, and then reactive oxygen species and inflammation, nitrogen dioxide and allergic inflammation and asthma, and then airway epithelial products as immunomodulators. So I have here basically a short narrative on what I did, what my contribution was, and how it might have influenced the scientific community. And then I have my citations under there. So they're about a half a page each. I have the complete list of published work in my bibliography, and we'll come back to this in a couple of slides. And then I have research support. So I have ongoing research support. I have the number, the PIs, the dates, the institution, the title, my role, and then what we're doing. And so you're supposed to capture what you've done in the last 3 years, so then you have past support as well. So a 5-page document, it's pretty straightforward. Let me go back here to the slides. So, do you only need one biosketch? Perhaps at the beginning, yes. You know, you've got a limited amount of things that you're trying to do, and you have a limited number of accomplishments, so you can have a single biosketch. Later on in your career, the answer is probably no. You'll need to cater your personal statement to reflect the specific application to which you're applying. You need to highlight the papers most relevant to the proposal or published with co-investigators on the application. I always like to, if I'm going in as a co-investigator, those first 4 papers after my personal statement, I like to include those that I've recently published with as collaborators. I like to keep my name bold so they can see, okay, that's where he is within the list of authors. And then I like to underline the co-investigators. I think it's easy on the eyes. So you have a CV, so use your CV to keep your biosketch up to date, right? Especially at the beginning. Every time that you update your CV, go ahead and see where it needs to have a reflection made into your biosketch as well. And make the document easy to read. Use uniform formatting throughout. I've seen some come to me because when co-investigators send their biosketches, you know, there'll be 4 different fonts, and, you know, just be consistent. Make it simple. Make sure it's grammatically correct. It's spell checked. Again, I said I like your name in bold. And then oftentimes these get converted to the NIH through PDF Maker, and make a PDF yourself and make sure that it doesn't look bad, because I've definitely seen things happen during the conversion process. So there are tools to help you build the biosketch. I don't find them useful, but this might be a worthy investment early. So for some of you, you might like this. There's something called Science CV, the Science Expert Network CV. So it creates biosketches for the NIH and for other federal agencies, so it could be more broadly useful. And I'm going to try to go to it here, and I'll have to log in. Even though I logged in on this computer earlier, I think it probably logged me out. All right, so this is the website. And you can see here's the Science CV and NIH Biosketch. And there's information here. There's even a nice video. If you can't find yourself sleeping at night, I recommend that. But it's really incumbent upon having a My Bibliography. Does anyone have My Bibliographies, especially the grad students yet? Those of you who have a couple of papers, especially once you get NIH dollars, NIH is going to want to make sure that you're submitting to the NIH all of your publications. And so we have something called My Bibliography, and I'm going to try to access it here through the Commons. That's not the easy way to do it. Try here through my NCBI, and then I'm going to do it through Commons. Okay. All right, so this is My Bibliography. Okay, it's got 106 items in it because you can submit your own. So at some point in the beginning, I put my dissertation in there. It's published, it's been reviewed. It's published by the University of Utah Press. So it's a publication, even though you wouldn't find it on PubMed, but you can find it in My Bibliography. So every time that we get a publication, we have to load it onto here. Sometimes it'll ask you if it's ready to be added. I see I've got a warning here that I put one in manually. And now it's actually been published. And so it's asking me to approve. Is this the actual paper that you meant? And yes, it is. So I can go ahead and finish, and then they'll update it. Now I won't have any warnings. Once you get NIH funding, you're going to need to keep this up to date so that you don't have any warnings when you submit progress reports. It's even important for if you're on a training grant. But anyways, this has a list of all of my publications. And with this, then, I can go to my Biosketch. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here. Hard for me to see at that angle. So I can go to my NCBI here. And one of the links down here is to Science CV. So I started my CV, it's like in 2013, and I gave up on it because I find it easier to keep up to date in a Word document than to do it here because I've got different purposes for having a Biosketch. But early in your career, like I said, this might be a worthy investment. So what it does is it asks you a bunch of different questions that go along with the same format that we described, or I described to you earlier. So it's got my name, it's got my Commons ID, it's got my education and training, and it saw that I was on an NIH training grant and it wants me to fill in this information. I tried earlier last week and I just couldn't get it to accept. It was a bit of a pain in the butt. So you can see that my education and training isn't complete. You can put in a personal statement. You can select citations from my bibliography. You can put in positions and honors, and you can see where you can edit them. Contributions to science, edit section, and then once you've got a section, it'll ask you to populate it from my bibliography with any of the papers that you have. And then funding as well. So there is that tool. Check it out and see if it's worth your time early on in your careers. No, not that I've seen. Because it's not going to go back, that far. So that's what I have for you. If you've got questions or we want to discuss things further, I welcome you to ask or give some feedback. Vicki. Right. I mean, the body of your application ends up being, this is what I want to do. And granted, we have background in there that you try to bolster what you've contributed to that.